Hello, and welcome to the San Francisco Opera Guild's opera preview of Omar, the new Pulitzer Prize winning opera by Rhiannon Giddens and Michael Abels. Co-commissioned by San Francisco Opera, this American story comes to the War Memorial Opera House in the production by director Kaneza Shaw and under the baton of conductor John Kennedy, who led the world premiere performances at Spoleto Festival USA in 2022. And under the ensemble cast is headed by tenor James McCorkle, acclaimed creator of the title role in his company debut as Omar. San Francisco Opera course director John Keene prepares the artists of the San Francisco Opera course. My name is Benjamin Osgood, and I serve on the board of directors for the San Francisco Opera Guild, whose award-winning education programs reach over 64,000 students annually in more than 215 schools. For tonight's preview, we are joined by two special guests, Laura Stanfield Prichard and Lenny Hayes. You may recognize Laura from our opera preview for The Revolution of Steve Jobs, and we're thrilled to have her back for this engaging analysis of Omar. And a little bit about Laura. She studied at Yale, Emory, and the University of Illinois. She holds master's and doctoral degrees in choral conducting, library science, musicology, and education. Since 1985, she has lectured regularly for the San Francisco and Chicago symphonies and opera companies in Boston and San Francisco. She was the president of the Pacific chapter of College of Music Society from 1986 to 1998 and assistant conductor of the San Francisco Symphony Course under Vance George from 1995 to 2003. Her 25 continuous years of college teaching have focused on interdisciplinary cultural analysis of music, dance, and art history. She was a finalist for the 2015 Pauline Alderman Award for Outstanding Writing on Women and Music and the 2019 Kurt Weill Award for Writing on Contemporary Musical Theater. We also are joined by Lenny Hayes. And a little note, if you want to see Lenny perform this weekend, if you catch this preview in time, he'll be performing the Florence Price Concerto in one movement for piano and orchestra, and he'll be with the La Jolla Symphony in San Diego on November 4th and 5th. Now, a little bit about Lenny. Lenny Hayes is an accomplished musician and doctoral student at the University of Southern California, where he studies under the tutelage of concert pianist Bernardine Blaha. Currently, he serves as the graduate teaching assistant in USC's Keyboard Studies Department. Lenny previously served as head of piano studies and assistant director in the Music Conservatory at the Booker T. Washington High School for the Performing and Visual Arts in Dallas, Texas. He has won numerous prestigious piano competitions and was awarded the 2015 Link Scholarship, which recognizes and celebrates the extraordinary talent of an African-American scholar musician. As a concerto soloist, recitalist, and chamber musician, Lenny has performed at notable venues all over the world, including the Conservatorium van Amsterdam, Walt Disney Concert Hall, and Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. He holds a Bachelor of Music degree from the Conservatory of Music at Lawrence University and a Master of Music degree from Eastman School of Music. Welcome, Laura and Lenny, to tonight's preview. How you both doing? There they are.
Feeling great. Feeling great. So happy to be here.
We're thrilled to have you both. And I'll hand it off to Laura for tonight's preview.
So, hello and welcome to everyone. We're really glad to have you here, and we had a successful open dress rehearsal, final dress rehearsal last night in the War Memorial Opera House in San Francisco. So, we are getting ready to officially have our San Francisco premiere of the new opera Omar by two composers, composer and librettist Rhiannon Giddens and composer Michael Abels. And I had a little bit of experience with this work earlier this year when it was premiered on the East Coast, I guess I should say the Northeast, by Boston Lyric Opera. It had its original premiere at the Spoleto Festival in Charleston, South Carolina. But Lenny was the main rehearsal pianist for the recent, much acclaimed and sold out Los Angeles Opera run of the work. And we were talking before, not only rehearsal pianist, especially integrating the chorus into the work with the soloist, but also the actual performance pianist under the direction of Michael Abels. So, welcome, Lenny. I know we only have you for about 15 minutes or so because you need to get in your car and drive to La Jolla to work with La Jolla Symphony. So, could I just start by asking you, since it's such a great benefit to have you here, what was that experience like? How did you interact with? I mean, I know you and I both, we've done a lot of work with new pieces. Usually there's just one composer to handle and one point of view. But here we have two different voices with very different skills. So, what was that like for you? What was your role?
Absolutely. So my role with this position, as the pianist, I was actually one of three rehearsal pianists, and two of which were former young artists. I wasn't a former artist, but my sort of relationship with the opera was that during 2020 of COVID, I was recommended as a pianist for their After Hours recital series, where we presented an hour and a half music of Black art songs. So my name was already a buzz in the ecosystem of LA Opera. So when this opportunity came up to be one of the pianists to serve as a rehearsal pianist, I jumped on it immediately. And I will say that I got the score in July. All three pianists, we got the score. And then rehearsals began in August. So we only had 4 weeks to learn the score. And when we got the PV score, unlike a Verdi score or a Puccini score where you have most of the instruments, the parts written in, we didn't have that. So we had to write in certain instruments, parts in the piano vocal score so that we could help the singers, and the conductor hear certain textures. So there's a lot of work on the back end that all three of us had to do, but it's so well worth it because we have the score and it's a document that is living with living composers. So from that vantage point, I was able to sit in on most of the rehearsals. Uh, and in the beginning of the rehearsal process, like anything, we all sat, all the pianists, and the conductor, we sat down with the singers. And mind you, Rhiannon hadn't arrived yet, so she didn't come in until much later into like the staging process. That's when we started to see Rhiannon a lot.
And
Um,
for her, this is a piece that is, in a way, is a little bit in her past, in her rearview mirror already, because she has gone back to traveling with a couple of different folk and popular music ensembles that she leads, and she has continued to develop new projects, taking folk music and classical music and blending those worlds. So, for example, in San Francisco, our audiences will get to see her at the last performance. Afterwards, she'll be involved in a talkback. But then just a few days after that, she'll be performing in Berkeley on her own. So, what kind of insight did that give you? I know you worked first with Michael Abels. He's a talented and much lauded film composer that's responsible for most of the orchestration and a
yeah.
lot of the parts that an opera audience will think of as the more operatic vocal writing, especially for some of the male characters. And then Rhiannon is the librettist
Mhm.
and wrote a lot of contrasting melodies. So who did you work with in what capacities?
Sure, sure. I would say in terms of work with the most, probably Giddens. Michael, I got to know him through the chorus rehearsals. He had his own sort of perception of how he thought the choir should sound. She and she did too, but I think they were saying the same thing, but in different ways. But with Rhiannon Giddens, I learned so much from her. She basically said she wanted to create melodies that people can sing to, that they could walk away humming. So she didn't want crazy vocal writing, but she did want to make sure that the sound that was coming out of the singer's voice or the chorus voice was actually authentic. That it wasn't they weren't trying to sound like an opera singer. For example, there are several moments in the opera well, there's one specific moment, I think, in the act two, when the choir is dancing, and they're doing like these little circles and rounds on the stage. and she really wants them to sound like they're from the Carolinas, with a little drawl in their little southern drawl in their voice. And then there's another moment in the score in the second act where Julie's aria is in there. And I remember her sitting down with the singer, and the singer, she sings the aria because I think there's a YouTube video of Rhiannon singing that aria as well. The singer finishes it and does something vocally, and Rhiannon turns her head out of out of just like, oh, did I write that or did I not? And it was basically a sort of artistic decision that the singer made, which was fine. She didn't rewrite the vocal line, but she sort of did a nuanced thing that Rhiannon asked her, could you please not? It will just help me to sleep better at night. So there were just moments where I said to myself, oh wow, Rhiannon is the, the author
The author. Yeah,
here, and she's the
authentic. Um, that's interesting because opera has a 200 or 400 plus year history, and there is a tradition of allowing a lot of leeway on repeated parts for the singers to improvise. And because this opera is written in a space between current contemporary music and collected folk music, some of those details need to be curated a little bit more. They need to be controlled a little bit more rather than saying there's a pause, so improvise whatever cadenza you want to say,
Mhm.
let's limit it to what's appropriate for this
A-
time. So that's really
Absolutely.
interesting. So
Yeah.
it's a two-act opera. In San Francisco, we're going to present it um, with a short intermission, so it'll be about a 2 hour and 45-minute experience.
Mhm.
And I'll be talking in my remarks after you're on your way driving south about the general shape and the plot synopsis of the opera. But in general, it does follow the real life events of a man named Omar ibn Said, and it's roughly chronological. And so I've heard Rhiannon say both. When I created the libretto, I wanted to use his real words and follow real elements. And I've also heard her say he's completely a made up character, an operatic character that I could craft. And there are some elements of the opera that come completely from her imagination. So I wonder if you could talk to us, because you've had the most time really in rehearsal with it, especially bringing an outside chorus in and trying to explain to them what's going on and why are these words appropriate. Um, could you talk a little bit about what are your favorite parts? What do you think the audience is really going to love?
Yes.
Um,
Yeah. Speaking of characters, Julie came to her at the last minute, actually. The Julie, the one that is sort of in Act Two when Omar is in this new land that he's not familiar with. He sees her again, and when she says, uh, I thought my daddy wore a cap like yours," that aria, which is sort of the signature aria for Julie. That character didn't come until later. She didn't, but she knew it was there, but she just didn't know where to place Julie,
so
and
in a way, the character of Julie is Rhiannon herself,
exactly.
inserting her idea of like, please tell your story and helping to frame it. That's a character that comes from Rhiannon's mind, you're saying.
Yes, yeah, it comes from her mind, and I think that and like you said, she can play with that. So, I mean, and I think for me in that moment, the reason why that character is so special to her is because, like you said, it's personal to her, but it's actually a moment for Julie to recognize that she has a story of her own to tell, but in that moment, she's validating this man that she once saw in Act One, And I will say, as a segue to my favorite moment, I think we really get to see Michael Abel's power here as an orchestrator, as a film composer. I mean, his use of silence to communicate drama and horror. I mean, if you look at the last scene of Act One, when all this chaos is going on, the mother's killed, and if you go see the live opera, please go see it. You'll see that if you look at the staging, I think they have the same staging director that they for this one as they did with LA Opera. I mean, she does a great job of, and to really match the music with the stage directing. Oh my goodness, the music and the silences that are implemented in that scene really do highlight his strengths. as a living composer in film land, but we're now bringing it to the stage, and know, those are my favorite moments. That scene of Act One and Julie's aria. It's just an intimate moment we really get to understand. Now, from the one of the challenging things in this opera is because he's a film composer, you know you really there is no time for messing up, not only as a rehearsal pianist, but also as an orchestra member. I have one little anecdote to share. There was a moment in the rehearsal process where the conductor, there was an issue with, I mean, the meters are changing constantly. If people don't know this, meters are constantly changing from 7/8 to this 8 and that 4 and that this. And so there was an issue with the conductor was having with an entrance in one of the scenes, and Michael could tell that there was some frustration there, and it's like, oh, the conductor's trying to find words to articulate woodwind section. There's something we're not together with the chorus, and Michael was so patient. And by the way, I didn't know that Michael Abels was a school teacher. It explains his calm demeanor. I learned that about him because I was a school teacher too. So he taps the conductor on the shoulder and he says, tell them to take out this measures 49 through 52, and that will solve your problem. And immediately when that happened, the conductor turned around and just laughed historically, So there's just something about those experiences where if we had Verdi here, or
He'd yell at
Puccini.
us a lot.
Yeah. So as a musician, I mean, learning the score,
Yeah.
I mean, that and seeing moments like that of watching Michael being able to say, you're allowed to do that, conductor. It's okay. Because I know that this is causing ensemble issues by me adding and he left it and he took it out. So
Yeah.
also watching that happen too, watching Michael take certain things out and give myself or the conductor revised additions even days before the premiere. That was just so enlightening to see. Yes.
Now we have at the bottom of our Zoom screen a Q&A. If anybody would like to write a question in for Lenny there, he's with us for a few more minutes. If you click on Q&A and you write a question in there, we have a couple of folks from San Francisco Opera staff that can look for those questions and pose them to you. While we're giving people a minute to do that, I wanted to share my screen. You are getting ready to drive down to La Jolla and play the Piano Concerto in One Movement by Florence Price. This is the recent book about her life. I wonder if you'd just say a word or so about how is this to play the piece by Omar? You've been working on Rhiannon Giddens and Michael Abels' opera, and then you've prepared to present this piano concerto by Florence Price. That's a work from 1933. First played in Chicago, and then you have all of your other stuff at USC that you do as a doctoral student.
Mhm.
So I wonder if you just talk a little bit about what does it feel like to play? How is it in the hands? What was your
Oh,
experience like for the Omar versus the Florence Price that you're getting ready to do tomorrow?
absolutely. I will say a brief little anecdote about the Omar. I will say, when you talk about getting it in your hands, I'm so grateful to have had that LA Opera premiere because I have Michael Abel's phone number in my phone book, and so he called me and asked me if I would be willing to serve as the pianist for the Ojai Festival this past summer because he
Hmm.
was commissioned to write a concert work version of that opera, and so I was able to be there for a week and just sit with such confidence and assuredness in my part, and it just felt so nice to know that, oh gosh, when the notes are in your hands, it just feels so different. It just feels, and it feels the same way with this concerto. I was asked by the Santa Monica Symphony to play this because there was a pianist that wasn't able to make the performance, and so I with they gave me proper notice, and it was about a year or two ago that I learned the concerto, and from now until then, I've probably played it 3 times. But once all the technical processes sit in your fingers, it's now, I was literally yesterday, I was at the piano yesterday. I spent about 4 hours on the second movement, which is the slow and the most heartfelt, uh, meaningful movement with beautiful original melodies I've ever heard. And because the technical physical stuff had been settled in, I was able to direct my attention to other things like the technique of listening and the technique of pedal, technique of color, and so it definitely it feels 10 times better, not only with the Ojai gig that I did with Michael and Rihanna this summer, but also this weekend. 'Cause it's in my fingers and it just feels so much better. I don't have to think about it. I can just think about, okay, all right, Florence, what do you want me to do here? Just sort
Great.
of one with the music.
Yeah, she's gotten a lot of attention. Her work has been revived. There are a huge cache of manuscripts found outside of Chicago, in the attic of one of the houses where she was had lived, and so it's wonderful to hear, from the 1930s, not just Copeland, but some other really powerful voices from about 90 years ago now in American
Yeah.
history. I'm glad you're getting to do that piece. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, I have,
Um,
I have about a couple more minutes. I'm not in a huge rush, but
that's fine.
I will say that, my minor at USC, my major is piano, but I have three minors. Musicology is one of them. And, uh, and I will say there's an article that was written on NPR about, the rediscovery of Florence Price, and there's actually been quite a lot of talk about that. Why is she being rediscovered? And why does that title exist? Well, I have several reasons as to why that is. We all know 1918, the migration is happening, so you have blacks moving from the south to the north, and but particularly for people of color, her mother was a school teacher, pianist, and her father was a dentist. So they're moving to Chicago. Florence moves on her own to Chicago from Arkansas around this time, around 1926 or so, because the Renaissance is happening there, where you get to see people of color thriving, but they are limited to churches, community centers and whatnot. And I think it was in those spaces that's where she was discovered. It what the rest of the world just didn't want to hear her yet. So I think that it's a big question that I'm interrogating at the doctoral level. It excites me, but I don't think this concerto was rediscovered. It was already known within her community. It's just it wasn't allowed into certain spaces. So I think that at its core. But I'm grateful that orchestras are playing it as much as I'm grateful that people are hearing Omar. It's a story. It's his story, and Florence Price's this concerto is her story too. So
Great. So let's see, Ben or Max or John, are there any questions that you can see in the Q&A that we could pose to Lenny or
Um,
anything?
Hey Laura, I don't think we have any questions from the audience currently, but thank you so much, Lenny, for coming and for sharing with us, and good luck with your performance tomorrow.
Let me put this screen up. This is the concert that you're getting ready to go to, La Jolla Symphony and Chorus,
yeah.
this weekend, a concert called This Soil. And although there's a picture of Leonard Bernstein there, um, the program includes you featured as pianist, and then there's the Florence Price piece listed, piano concerto in one movement. So, congratulations on that. That's wonderful to get to be asked. That's an awesome group to perform with.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, and I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful run of show there in San Francisco. It's a wonderful work. It's just, oh gosh, goosebumps. I get goosebumps just knowing that it's there in San Francisco, that opera. So
Great. All right. Well, I'm going to continue on then, and I'm going to show a few web pages that relate to the opera Omar. Um, One is the composer's page, Michael Abels, and he has a couple of symphonic sections, parts without vocal music from Omar on his website that you can listen to. And so we will be listening to the overture to the first act, which is based on one of the very oldest tunes written down in the Caribbean to be brought over from Africa. It's a tune first written down in 1707, which is 100 years before Omar ibn Said himself was transported from Senegal across to Charleston, South Carolina. So you will hear a 1707 tune helping us with an 1807 story. So I'll come back to this page. It's michaelables.com. He's responsible for the orchestrations, and he's responsible for a lot of the great sung tunes, and especially some of the male characters. We have in the Bay Area a wonderful web review site called San Francisco Classical Voice, and there's a version of it that exists down in Southern California that's just called Classical Voice. And they have featured one of the main female soloists for Omar recently on this website. This is mezzo soprano Taylor Raven. She is singing the character that Lenny and I were speaking about, a fictional character that's sort of a foil for the librettist and composer Rhiannon Giddens. It speaks directly to the audience, and she speaks a little bit like a Greek chorus. She is one of the people that says to the title character Omar that you should tell your story and keep your name alive. And I think it's wonderful to have her in particular, not just because of her great artistry and what she brings to the character of Julie that Rhiannon wrote, as Lenny said, last to fill out the opera. But she's also from Fayetteville, North Carolina, which is the exact same city where Omar spent the second half of his life. So there are a lot of tunes that Rhiannon collected and quotes in this opera from North Carolina. And to have a singer from Fayetteville, North Carolina, really brings a rich, deep authenticity to our presentation in San Francisco. So that's San Francisco Classical Voice, or sfcv.org. And they've done a few articles about the upcoming premiere in San Francisco of Omar. Our website at San Francisco Opera has a whole page on Omar, of course, and it does list both composers equally, Rhiannon Giddens, who is the librettist and composer, and Michael Abels, who is orchestrator and composer. The run time that they've got listed is 2 hours and 50 minutes, so you'll hear about you'll hear a little bit over an hour of vocal music, and then you'll hear vocal music in English, I should say. And you'll hear about 10 to 15 minutes of music in Arabic, because the character of Omar doesn't learn English until the basically intermission, about halfway through the opera. And there will be surtitles in English the entire time. Then there are additional minutes of music that are purely instrumental. For example, the prelude that we'll listen to while we're looking at a little bit of the score as part of this presentation. The digital program book button has been recently added, so now you can read the program book at home. And the performances are listed. I believe that this Sunday, November 5th, performance is sold out already. All of the other performances, I believe there are still tickets. It says buy tickets, so maybe some are available again. Those evening performances, Tuesday, Saturday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, will have talkbacks after the performances. And all of the live performances will have a live pre-show discussion that talks about the synopsis of the opera in more detail, names all of the different characters, real and imagined, and lets you hear more sound files from the recent productions. There's a synopsis on our website now, and then there's a wonderful online program book where you can click on the different musicians playing different characters. Oh, I see that Taylor is singing Fatima, Omar's mother, and not Julie. Okay, so then I will let you hear excerpts of their voices as well. Let's see, creative team is listed, and as part of this presentation, we will hear in video form from Rhiannon, from Michael, from director Kaneza Shaw. So let me put this away, and I have a presentation with some slides to share with you. So this is the fourth presentation of Omar. It was first premiered at the Spoleto Festival in Charleston, South Carolina, only a few miles from the actual boat dock where Omar ibn Said first stepped onto American soil. This is an image from the Spoleto production, the very first production. And in general, I would say the visual elements of the production have evolved in two ways. And so we're really benefiting from being the fourth production of this work. The early productions had a lot of printed fabrics, both printed that the singers were wearing, and also large hanging printed fabrics as set pieces. And so you may recognize this image that is printed on the curtain hanging behind the central character. This is actually the center part of a packing diagram. If you could kind of zoom out, it's the shape of a ship, sort of an ovoid shape. And the image is of human bodies to show how many people could lie side to side inside a ship moving from West Africa to the southern coast of the United States. And so, like this image, the early production tended to be white fabrics with black ink appearing on it. One thing that really marks the visual quality of this production as a whole is that you will see a great deal of written cursive manuscript writing printed on the fabrics the singers wear and printed on set pieces. And a lot of that is Omar ibn Said's own handwriting, both in Arabic and in English. As he begins to understand English and is taught English, some of the fabrics will transform from characters who had been wearing Arabic to wearing English text. So this black and white look is part of the early first stage of the production. So Spoleto Festival presented it first. Boston Lyric Opera presented it second. LA Opera presented it third, at which point the costumes especially, but the costumes and the sets have become much more colorful and vivid. And instead of just seeing all this fantastic writing printed on cloth, it's now incorporated much more as video elements as well. So when the character is singing, you'll see the words appear gradually through video behind the singers. Here's a couple of pictures of how this has transformed and how color and video has been brought in. The image on the right is the earlier performances, and you see Arabic and English documents relating to the history of the slave trade in purple behind the lead singer, and then English handwriting on the costume. And then the image on the left, you see video elements, and this is an earlier scene where he's remembering his life in Senegal. The first 37 years of his life were in Senegal. And as he sings about his community, the chorus representing the community appears, and his words appear through video projected all over the set and the people. And if you look carefully at what the chorus is wearing, they're also wearing his words describing them. So Omar ibn Said was born in 1770. That's the same year as Beethoven. And he lived a long life. He was brought to Charleston, South Carolina in the first decade of the 19th century and lived most of the rest of his life in North Carolina. Here is a real photo of him from the second to last year of his life. This is a photo from 1863, taken the exact same week that he first heard the Emancipation Proclamation read, although he was never freed during his lifetime. The basic synopsis of the opera does follow his life story. The librettist and composer Rhiannon Giddens has said both that it is a way, her libretto is a way of bringing his story to life, using as much as possible his own words. But then other times she's been interviewed, she has said, what you're seeing in the opera is a character. It's her conception of what he would have heard, things he was thinking about, and especially the sound world, not only of music, but of the mix of languages and the power of language throughout his life to shape the way that he lived. So, to just say briefly a little bit about the geography of his life and the timeline of his life, because that gives you the basic synopsis of the opera. It begins in Senegal. He is born in 1770 in Futa Toro. He had the opportunity to speak both two native African languages and also to study, read, and write Arabic. And he mentions in his own written autobiography that he studied Arabic for 25 years. So his first language was Wolof, Wolof. So in 1770, that's what he's learning first. Around 1782, he starts to learn Arabic, and he was able to make several pilgrimages to Mecca. So if you think of the general map of Africa, the round shape to the west, the coastal area of that is Senegal. So that's quite a long journey to travel all the way across the southern rim of the Mediterranean to visit Mecca as a devout Muslim. And on the way, he was able to visit a few major city centers and even visit Islamic mosque universities at this early time. Now, that may surprise you a little bit. There were actually several institutions of higher education in Northern Africa before there were ever modern medieval universities in Europe. So I have a slide with some of those dates and facts. In 1807, he said, an army came and took some of us, put us on a great ship, and we crossed the Great Sea. He landed in Charleston, South Carolina, and I have that number 40%. That is where 40% of enslaved Africans first stepped onto American soil. And then after 3.5 years, he was able to escape captivity and ended up in North Carolina, was taken by someone and put in jail, and really that was almost to keep him safe. He was not tortured, he was not lynched, he was not chased in that sense. And he was, while he was in jail for a little over 2 weeks, he was allowed to have writing material, and he wrote all over the walls of his jail cell. And that was how he was brought to the attention of a family whose last name was Owen. And he would spend the rest of his life living with that family as an enslaved man near Fayetteville, North Carolina. So from 1810 until the end of his life in 1864, he was a North Carolinian. They were a family that was a little bit outside the norm. They were very well educated. The brother of the main family that he lived with eventually became the first governor of North Carolina after the Civil War. So they were Presbyterian, which set them a little bit apart from their community, which was largely Baptist Protestant. And they happened to collect Bibles in different languages. So one of the ways that he was able to first communicate with them was that they had a Bible in Arabic. And he immediately, when given that Bible, turned to the book of Psalms and was able to read Psalm 23. And it turned out that several people who become important characters in Act 2 of this opera, that was their favorite text. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, is a typical English translation. He translated it, the Lord is my master. In Arabic, the word isn't quite shepherd. And so it's more of a God that has control over people rather than a metaphorical shepherd and sheep. In 1831, he became the first and only enslaved man to write anything like an autobiography. And I am so glad that the Library of Congress has gotten interested in him and interested in his story. Starting in 2017, They've put a huge amount of time and treasure behind trying to collect all the documents they can that are extant related to his life. And if you ever have a chance to go to the African and Middle Eastern section of the Library of Congress in Washington, they will get the documents out for you. You can see his original handwriting. You can see the leaves of paper he wrote on, some of his own translations, and two early translations, one of which was published in the form of an autobiographical book based on his life. So the opera is Act 1, Senegal, learning Arabic, the army coming, the middle passage on the ship, arriving in Charleston, South Carolina, and then a scene that's completely imagined about what went on during the auction and the buying of people, and that introduces a few of the fictitious characters. And then there is an opportunity to flee. And in the second act, we are in North Carolina pretty much the whole time, and we are working with the title character, the imagined character of Julie, and the Owen family. Now I've added 3 kind of irritating slides here full of text as a result of being asked to by folks I was speaking to over the last week at the opera guilds in the San Jose Opera Guild and the South Bay Opera Guild. They were interested in some of these historical elements. So I don't usually do this where I read to you text, but I wanted to give you real dates and real numbers related to some of the general things I've said. There was higher education in Northern Africa before there were modern medieval style universities beginning in, for example, Bologna, Italy, in the 11, 12, 1300s. In the 3rd century BC, there was a center of learning in Egypt that in modern English we call the Alexandria Museum or the Great Library of Alexandria. That was in existence for a couple of hundred years before it burned, and there are papyrus scrolls from that library that survive in modern collections. When Omar ibn Said came through to go to Mecca, he was able to see items that may have originally been in this museum or library complex. They held over 200,000 volumes. These were mostly papyrus scrolls. During the period the Alexandria Library was open, they had 5,000 scholars from all around the Mediterranean Rim. Egyptian scholars mainly reading Coptic, African scholars, Greek and Roman scholars, and Jewish scholars. And there were scrolls in a variety of languages. Then a second stage of higher education in Northern Africa developed in the period of early Christianity. Early Christian monasteries moved away from the Mediterranean Rim south into the desert to basically get away from the eyes of the Roman Empire. And so there are monasteries that start to pop up and collect books along the major rivers and even out in some of the deserts where there are oases. In the 3rd century CE or AD, you find these kind of schools and libraries in Egypt. And in the 4th century, you find them in Ethiopia. And Christianity would eventually become well, actually not eventually, pretty early on became the state religion of Ethiopia. So in Egypt and in Ethiopia, from this period and continuing into the modern time, you could attend at a college or graduate or adult scholarly level the Kine Bet, or the hymn school, the Zema Bet, a poetry school, and the Metzahift Bet, the holy books or holy documents school. And that's something that Omar ibn Said would have had a chance to see. He, though, was not ancient Egyptian and he was not Christian. He was a Muslim. And so the organizations that he visited more directly and knew more about were Islamic mosque universities. These are the first 4 that have endured to the present. That very oldest one, the Ez Zitouna Madrasa, is still a madrasa in Tunis. It is not a modern style university, but the other three you can visit, and they have modern bachelor and master and doctoral degrees offered since this early time. 859, the Al Qarawiyyan Mosque University in Fez. One of the San Jose Opera Guild members that attended my talk a couple of days ago was just there last week on a trip to Morocco and visited the university and saw ancient items in its collection. 969, the Mosque University in Cairo, that's now called Al Azhar, was founded. That still exists. In 989, Timbuktu University, now called University of Sankore in Timbuktu, Mali, was founded. Excuse me. The subjects below might look to you like the same kinds of subjects that you think of when you think of ancient Greece, the trivium and the quadrivium. We have math, we have sciences, theology, astronomy and astrology. We have logic being taught, and then a variety of means of communication: grammar, rhetoric, like public speaking, history, and geography. So those were things that Omar knew about, and some of which he was able to visit. Now, I mentioned that there's a contest of languages in this opera. You will hear it sung mostly in English, and the surtitles will appear in English. For Omar ibn Said himself, his native language was Wolof. Wolof is the language that still exists today, that preserves a lot of the shapes and musical elements that we associate with the roots of the blues. He said that he gradually forgot this language, and it certainly was not a language that he was writing in when he was living in the Americas. Those next three languages are other native languages in Senegal: Pulaar, Serer, Diola, Soninka. So these are the languages that he would have heard on the ship while he was being transported. And for me, one of the most moving scenes in the opera is that scene in the center of Act 1, where you hear characters singing in English, crying out on the ship, and they are not able to understand each other. They're not able to share their stories. They're not able to console each other because they've been brought from different parts of Senegal and the surrounding territory, and they are not all from one community. And that's something that I'm sure that he struggled with for his first 3 years in South Carolina, before escaping to North Carolina and being allowed and encouraged to write in Arabic and to learn English so that he could tell his story and communicate his thoughts. Now, he did also speak Mandingo, so underneath Arabic, you have Mandingo. Arabic was first taught and spoken fairly widely in the upper class, the princes, the kings, the nobility of Senegal in the 11th century. So it had been around for 700 years before Omar was born in 1770. Mandingo came in about 250 years later as the Mandingo people put pressure on the eastern side of Senegal. So they're coming in from the right side of the map, and they are having influence on Senegal. The trade languages, and I hope soon we have a different word rather than trade, because that kind of equates trade in pottery and trade in sugarcane with trade in humans. The languages of the trade with Europe started in the late 15th century, 1460s, 1780s. This is an area that's easily reached and just south of Portugal and Morocco. And so in Senegal, it's possible that Omar ibn Said would have heard Europeans, especially in bigger urban centers, speaking Portuguese and Dutch, British English, and French. And if you know a little bit about the modern history of Senegal, it did become kind of the crown jewel of French colonial Africa, and its largest city, Dakar, was the capital of French colonial Africa by the end of the 1800s. Senegal was formally a territory of France from 1895 until 1960, and that sounds really recent to me, when it gained its independence. So I wanted to let you hear from more of the creators themselves. This is first Rhiannon Giddens. She is the librettist and a MacArthur Genius Grant winning expert in folk music. Although she did study classical music at Oberlin and took a wide variety of voice lessons, different kinds of operatic and chamber singing, she decided to dedicate herself to collecting and preserving and bringing out high quality, mainly African American folk music of North Carolina, where she is from. So let's hear her words first.
My name is Rhiannon Giddens, and I am the librettist and co-composer for the opera Omar. It is a journey through Omar ibn Said's life and internal struggle. His story is really, really necessary addition to broadening the idea of what an American story is. He was a Senegalese Quranic scholar who was stolen from his homeland and sold into slavery, and he ended up in Charleston first, and then he ran away from the man who bought him there and ended up in Fayetteville, North Carolina, where he ended up living out the rest of his days as an enslaved man. But he wrote his autobiography in Arabic. You know, it's the only document of that kind we have in the United States, and it's really important, not only because it's a story from an enslaved person's own pen and point of view, even though we know that there's a lot of layers over that, because as he knows, people are, you know, he is in somebody else's power while he's writing that, so we always have to consider that. But also that he was Muslim, and that's a whole chapter of, you know, American history that is not really talked about. The 1/4 to 1/3 of enslaved people who were Muslim who were brought to the United States. And of course with the backdrop of the Middle Passage and the auction block and all of these things. But this is the reality for thousands upon thousands of people, is that they had to live their lives under like the most unbelievable duress, you know? So the opera is attempting to have, you know, not really pull the punches of what he was going through, but when you get to the end, what you remember is not the Middle Passage, is not the bad master, is his triumph in figuring out how to maintain connected to his God. There's a million different ways to tell Omar's story, and I hope that happens. I hope this is not the last, you know, that we hear of Omar ibn Said. I mean, he deserves as many treatments as a lot of other, you know, American stories. We don't need, you know, there's a lot of people we don't need more stories about. We could do with a few more Omar stories, you know. And I chose a way through it that made sense to me as a American North Carolinian banjo player of mixed race, you know. And I'm very, very clear about that. But in my own way, I really tried to make his words speak as much as possible. There's a triumph in Omar, and that's the important piece of digging into this history, particularly for people of the African diaspora, African Americans, people who are descended from these stories. And I want people to feel that, I want them to walk out going, we're all of us carrying pain. We're all of us carrying trauma. And I understand the trauma that I'm carrying a little bit better because I've seen how this character overcame his.
That was a film that was made earlier this fall for the West Coast premiere, which took place in Los Angeles. Now I'd like to let you hear her speaking directly to musicians in rehearsal. This is what we were talking about at the beginning of the presentation tonight. Lenny was talking to you about what it felt like to be present as one of 3 rehearsal pianists in the LA opera production. And there's a little film that we made in Boston when Boston Lyric Opera was putting this together. Rhiannon was able to come to rehearsals, and Boston Lyric Opera neither has a home building, like a big opera house like San Francisco has historically, nor does it have a set professional chorus that it draws from to use for every production. So there were a wide variety of singers in the chorus, some of whom had never sung in an opera before, of whom were interested in the topic and came from big black gospel churches in Boston. Everybody had classical musical training, but we really needed to be guided by her words for why did she choose these words to be sung, and where did some of these tunes come from? How are the tunes authentic to the story and the time period? So here's a look behind the stage in Boston of one of the choral rehearsals.
When I approached this opera, I knew right away that I wanted to incorporate North Carolina music into it. I wanted to be specific. I wanted to be local. I wanted, and as much as, look, I don't have a time machine and I can't go back to when Omar was brought up to Fayetteville and to know exactly what he heard, but I feel like I had the best chance of many to have a line into that because of my experience with Joe. This is from North Carolina. My mentor, Joe Thompson, was 86 when I met him. He was an African-American fiddler, one of the last of the old style, learned from his father. It's a long line that goes all the way back to the time of slavery, and this is a tune that I learned from him. And so that's why I put it in this. It's about as close as I can get to what Omar would have heard, in a way that's authentic to me. But it's, I can't do it without the banjo, but anyway. Oh, corn liquor was the cause of it all. Oh, corn liquor was the cause of it all. Oh, corn liquor was the cause of it all. Oh, corn liquor was the cause of it all. I got drunk, fell off the wagon. Oh, corn liquor was still on dragging. I got drunk, fell off the wagon. Oh, corn liquor was still on dragging. I got drunk. So what I did is I took one of Joe's tunes and I incorporated it into the opera. And there's a dance and there's this idea of enslaved communities being these three-dimensional things, They had music and they had dance and they had ways of having joy and ways of finding connection with each other that had nothing to do with their enslavers. And it's important to have that feel now because you're going to be dancing. Just to let you know.
So at the end, she says it's important to have that feel, to get that rhythm completely internalized because you're going to be dancing. And more so than many operas, you do see the chorus in motion. You see the chorus embodying a wide variety of different groups. And that is typical of the sound of the choral music in Act 2, the North Carolinian music, which is largely quoting from authentic sources. Now, I mentioned that the actual story, the actual autobiography, the actual manuscripts appear on stage in the set and the costume. So I wanted to let you look at these costumes up a little closer. Because I'm from Southern Illinois, one of my first musical professional jobs as a child was playing for melodrama. And in melodrama, it's basically a spoken form with stereotyped characters that the audience loudly encourages and participates. And a typical bad guy villain in American melodrama is someone who has very stock, powerful gestures, and almost always is seen with exactly this mustache that you see on the character on the left. This is a character from Charleston, South Carolina, from Act 1, and the costume is wearing lists of slaves and writings in English that are translations of the part of Omar ibn Said's biography that he describes his 3 years living under someone he characterized as a bad master in just outside of Charleston. He escapes, and in Act 2 is bought by a man named Jim Owen, and that is sung by the exact same opera singer. And so you'll see the character's costume transform. It won't be these harsh sort of paper-looking fabrics, and the writing on the costume will be descriptions of Jim Owen and praising of Jim Owen directly from Omar ibn Said's autobiography. The character on the right is that character Lenny and I were speaking about, a fictitious character, one that kind of can be outside of and comment on the action, named Julie. And so you'll see in the clothes that she wears, both English and Arabic. As Omar learns more English, her costume will have more English on it, and the Arabic around the bottom of her skirt, and that's his handwriting from his autobiography. I wanted you to hear a little bit of the aria that Lenny mentioned. He said the last character that Rhiannon added to the libretto was this character of Julie that she made up. She wrote Julie in a way that she could also sing, and she has presented excerpts from the aria recently at the Ojai Music Festival that she was the director of in Southern California. So I wanted to let you hear Rhiannon Giddens herself singing one part of Julie's aria, and it has Bill Frisell playing a little bit of electric guitar. If this opera had only been composed by Rhiannon Giddens, this is more what it would sound like. It would have a much smaller orchestrational approach, a smaller group. It would be more intimate, and without the very important input of Michael Abels, we wouldn't have a full classical operatic orchestration. So I wanted to let you hear this smaller, sort of earlier conception of the work. This is a little bit of Julie's aria from Act 2 of Omar, sung by the librettist and composer Rhiannon Giddens herself.
Just like this. Some men they came a courting after that, but they ate all the lean, they ate all the fat. They drove my mama crazy, and she sent them all away. We find each other in the darkness. The way we look at the world isn't the same, but the way our hearts can see each other, there is the flame, there is the light. It ain't no shame to hold on tight to memories, to histories, to feelings. It's healing. So remember it all. I do. What else do we have?
Now that's very beautiful. It may sound to you like it comes completely from a folk music or popular music perspective. There's not a lot of fast harmonic movement in the bass, and there's a lot of repeated patterns, but this is actually an aria in the same key and structured in the same way over the same repeated type of bass pattern and she's making reference to a very specific aria. It's the same in many ways as an aria at the end of one of the first great English operas, and the only Baroque English opera set in Africa, Dido and Aeneas by Henry Purcell. And through the text and through the repeated bassline musical form and through the choice of key, it is similar to an aria that's known in English as Dido's Lament, where Dido sings, "Remember me, remember me, remember my legacy." So there are some really cool, subtle references to great classical operatic works. Now let's hear directly from our director, Kneza Shaw.
My name is Kneza Shaw, and I am directing Omar. I believe that great art requires speaking many languages, and those are aesthetic and artistic languages, but those are also historical languages and cultural languages and experiential languages. In thinking about how to depict this world on stage, the estate that I am interested in celebrating is the estate of Omar's mind. Text appears on stage in a bunch of different ways. One of the ways is on fabrics that we printed that include some of Omar's writing, some of his drawings, his writing in Arabic, his writing in English, and also include texts that relate to the institution of slavery, texts that relate to how that institution was built. And those materials exist in the fabrics on costumes, they exist in set pieces, and so throughout the work we're really thinking about the contest of languages in Omar's life and how he ultimately holds everything at once. There's a scene in which he's in jail, and he's tried to flee to freedom, and he was captured and he was put in jail. And he began writing on the walls of his jail cell, and it became a kind of spectacle. People would come and look at this man who had written in his jail cell. And when I was thinking about how to kind of bring that scene to life, I wanted his ferocious capacity to hold on to himself, to take over the stage. And so in that section, we have printed fabrics that show up on every corner of the stage, draping the set, draping the floor.
And these are, a lot of these texts come directly out of his autobiography describing this moment. This is very typical, 400-year-old Italian opera way to depict a jail cell, 4 ropes abstractly coming up above him. And you see these walls of the jail cell. But to me, when I'm in California, I'm living on a boat, the fabrics look like sails. And the simple ropes that are representing a cage or a jail, those also look like the ropes that would lift sails on a sailing ship. So I think it's a really incredibly nuanced set design.
This is a pivot point through which we all understand ourselves. And it's the beginning of a discussion. And I think what a director does ultimately is facilitate discussions between artists, discussions between audiences, and discussions between great cultural moments. I think at our best, Omar is a platform for every audience member to experience their own intimacy with this story. This is a story that defines all of our lives, whether we are the first in the generations of our family to sleep on this soil, or whether our families have been sleeping on this soil for many generations.
Now, we've heard a lot from the women who helped to create this work, and so I'd like to let you hear from the composer Michael Abels. Let's see, clicking on the wrong things here. No, sorry. I want to open a new thing. I want to move to the next slide. Let's see. May have to go out of this for just a second. Play from current slide. All right, you should be able to see a slide here that has the piano reduction that Lenny was playing from for rehearsals for the opening music. This is the overture to the opera. It is based on the very earliest tune transcribed in the Caribbean, thought to be directly from Africa. you have a descending scale, the ba-da-da-da-da-da-da, bum-bum-bum-ba-dum, so it's kind of a 3-measure theme. You hear it used in a theme and variations format, which is very typical of classical and romantic symphony development. Then you'll hear a set of variations that just use the rhythm and the harmony, and the tune will disappear, but the same structure will be there, just like a blues or jazz musician might improvise on the structure of a song without the melody present. Then the third thing you'll hear in the overture are a series of very beautiful lyrical melodies that are highly decorated. And as with most of the music you've heard so far, the piece moves back and forth between major and minor very fluidly. Those are melodies Michael Abels composed for the moments that Omar is praying, because more so than writing down actual pitches that someone uses when they are singing an Arabic call to prayer or reciting from the Quran, the African quality of that music is not so much the dots and the melody and the exact rhythms. It is the whole process that is being embodied, the doing of it, the reading of the prayer. In that sense, the notes are kind of incidental, and so he makes up some new melodies for that rather than transcribing a historical melody. And a lot of Muslim scholars said that wouldn't be appropriate anyway, because if you are not Muslim, singing to Muslims in a context where you all believe in those prayers, you wouldn't be doing it right anyway, even if you had transcribed the melody notes and the rhythm notes. So you get to hear some beautiful lyrical melodies that are inspired by Islamic chanting, and then you'll hear this theme come back again from the full orchestra. So let me make sure it plays correctly. Theme up so you can see it. a fantastic masterpiece that can evolve from basically this three measure idea. 1707 is when this is first written down. 1807 is when Omar is brought to South Carolina. So it's wonderful for Rhiannon to have found some of these original documents to make this more authentic and more immediate. Let's hear just a little bit from composer Michael Abels, and then we're winding up now. We're almost done. So if you have questions you'd like answered, please do take this time to write them in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen.
At the time, because his culture to kind of reveal the breadth and width of his humanity.
Act 2.
James Owen, a prominent planter and politician, a devout Christian, is intrigued. He buys Omar, gives him special treatment, introduces him to Christianity. Omar may or may not have converted, willingly or not. He was enslaved, and everything that's known about his life, the question of his conversion, even what's in his autobiography, has to be seen through that lens.
I felt like I was reading a document by someone who was watching his words.
What do you mean?
I didn't feel his heart. I felt like he was hiding himself.
But without these pages, without being able to stare into his eyes, there would be no opera attempting to fill in the blanks. Omar will travel next to Los Angeles and multiple other cities after that. Omar ibn Said was thought to be 93 when he died in 1864, after the Emancipation Proclamation, before the end of the Civil War. He was never freed.
Why is Omar's story important to tell people?
Because of everything we've been talking about, recovering our history and telling the full history of the United States in a way that includes what a multicultural country we've always been.
I don't think I can say it better than Julie does in the opera, you know? Tell your story, Omar, you must, or they will never know, and we will fade into dust. That's it. We need to know their stories, and then we know more about who we are now.
Okay, so I'd like to stop sharing my screen and thank all of you very much for sharing this time with us, watching these amazing American creators talk about their own work and get us ready to hear either the live version of this in San Francisco or to stream the opera from San Francisco from wherever you are. Maybe see it two different ways.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was such a wonderful discussion, and I really appreciate you for being so thorough. Hello, everyone. I'm here to just present the Q&A questions that you've all submitted to Laura for our discussion. So thank you all for being here, and thank you, Laura, again for your presentation. We have a question from the audience. You mentioned that there was a film made by the LA Opera of Rhiannon Giddens speaking about Omar. And one of our audience members wanted to see if it was accessible to San Francisco opera goers.
Yep, so those are posted on YouTube now. So if you type into YouTube just her first name, Rhiannon, or her full name, Rhiannon Gibbons, and Omar, you will find every publicity document she made, both for the Boston production and for the LA Opera production. Boston Lyric Opera recorded the whole thing, and one of the local radio stations broadcast it in September. So you can go to the Boston Lyric Opera website, and for free you can listen to all of it. Sounds sort of like listening to an old-fashioned record. And then if you want to see it through your computer, then San Francisco Opera is offering a $27.50 ticket, and they will stream one of the performances next week live, and that'll be available for at least 48 hours. I'm not, do you remember, Max, how long it's available? So available for at least a few more days after that. There's also TV interviews that were made for the very first premiere in Spoleto, and you can find those now on YouTube as well, just by typing in Rhiannon Giddens and Omar into YouTube.
Perfect. Thank you. Hopefully, audience member, that is helpful. If not, just let us know. But I agree. I think it's 48 hours that you can stream it. I'm curious. I haven't seen the opera yet. I'm excited to do so. How does the opera grapple with Omar's like coerced conversion to Christianity? How does that play out on stage?
He mentions in his, let me just share my screen for a second again. There is online from the National Humanities Center a free translation of the main manuscript pages of his autobiography that were used by Rhiannon Giddens to make this libretto. And if you go to National Humanities Center, you can find this document online. And so it basically, with the large text, it starts with, in his own words in Arabic, and then this is his English translation, a long prayer and a bunch of questions like, can there be anything in the world that is not God's work? That kind of thing. And then a couple of pages in Arabic, and then again his own translation, he says, I cannot write my life because I've forgotten much of my own language as well as the Arabic. And then he says, you asked me to write my life. And there's a lot of this, I am not able to do so. This is very old form. It goes back to Cicero and Roman and Greek writers, where you apologize, called the apologia. You say, I can't do full justice to this. I'm going to do my best. And he uses that formal form and then starts to say, my name is, my birthplace was. And when you get to the question that you just asked, which is Act 2 of the opera, the National Humanities Center has a map there moving from Senegal to the Carolinas. He describes escaping Johnson and going to Fayetteville. He always writes Fayetteville or Fayetteville for Fayetteville. And he says, I came into the hand of General Owen. And he talks about being shown an Arabic Bible and using biblical text to communicate with the English speakers around him. And then the family was Presbyterian, and they said on this date he converted to Presbyterian. He became a Christian. And the modern mosque in Fayetteville is named after Omar ibn Said. So there's not a lot of specific direction from Omar himself. Things like, here is what I did. It reminds me of the part of the Bible. When I was a child, I saw as a child, I thought as a child. Before I came to the Christian country, my religion was the religion of, and then he describes different aspects of being a Muslim in Senegal, including went on a pilgrimage to Mecca. In another document, he says he went 4 times. When I left my country, I was 37 years old. And then a lot of this, even though it's written in the 1830s, it looks like Whitman. And the original Arabic looks like this too. Oh, you people of North Carolina. Oh, you people of South Carolina. Oh, you people of America. And you'll hear some of these exact words in the mouths of the chorus and in the mouths of the soloists in Act 2. So the conversion, the only line we have from him is this highlighted one here. According to power, I open my heart as to a great light to receive the true way, the way of the Lord Jesus the Messiah. And that's the only reference he makes to conversion, whether it was authentic or compelled. They permit me to read the gospel of God. So he was allowed to read from an Arabic Bible, eventually English as well.
Okay, that's really interesting. Thank you. I guess maybe one final question before we close. Oh, do we have a new one? Oh, one of our audience members wanted to ask, Has Professor Prichard seen the Omar productions? And will you let us know what your preferred production has been, if you've seen it performed at other opera houses?
Yeah, I saw the Boston production in Boston. I've seen excerpts of the LA production. They have several long scenes that are visible, and I think it's much more uplifting and colorful as a result of some of the changes made between Boston and Los Angeles, just visually. And the use of modern technology, the use of video especially, is extremely moving to see him composing a thought and to see the text appear gradually. Makes you want to go, learn more calligraphy and more languages so that you can get all of that subtlety. It's wonderful to have the English subtitles all the way through. And a lot of our local San Francisco members were, if you join the Opera Guild, you are invited to several open rehearsals, so they were able to see it completely last night and the final dress rehearsal in the Opera House, which is really great experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel when I saw Lohengrin at SFO, they had such cool projection and light work. I imagine we really need and maybe similar to see Omar. But I think maybe now we should wrap up. Thank you so much, everyone, for submitting your questions. Thank you, Laura. I'll turn things over to Peggy Hill now to close us out.
Hi, thank you very much, Laura. Interesting as always. And as Laura mentioned, if you cannot get into San Francisco to see the opera live, you can sign up on the San Francisco website to see Omar live streaming Saturday, November 11th at 7:30. And then the following morning at 10 a.m., it's then available for another 48 hours. And looking forward to seeing you virtually for our next preview, The Elixir of Love, Thursday, November 16th at 6 p.m. with our Italian expert, Alexandra Amati. And then, of course, we'll hope to see you in the summer for the 3 summer operas. And final goodbyes from Benjamin Osgood.
Thanks, Peggy. Thanks, Max. Thanks, Laura. And yeah, I will echo Peggy's comment, and also thank you to one of our viewers who reminded us that one of the great benefits of becoming a full season subscriber is that you can stream for free. So if you can't make it out in person, please take advantage of that. The streamings are just absolutely incredible and offer such a cool perspective of the opera. And thank you for the comments. We got some really great comments from people. So thank you for those. And so, with that, we'll conclude tonight's preview of the upcoming Bay Area premiere of Omar. Remember, it opens this Sunday, November 5th, and you can find this online through the run of the production. So that will end on Tuesday, November 21st. Simply visit www.sfopera.com/opera previews. And from everyone here at the San Francisco Opera and San Francisco Opera Guild, thank you and good night.